Assassin's Promise by Thomas Woodward. Chapter 101. The wind stirred. The shrouded figure moved on silent feet, tasting the air as another man might a fine wine. The long, powerful arms ended in hands that were missing a fifth finger at each knuckle. The desert simply parted before the creature. The sand moved back as if it had been blasted away by the arm of a god. None witnessed this, save the insects and buzzards flying high above the ground. Muscles worked powerfully under the half-hidden ceremonial vest the figure wore. The heavy black shroud was wrapped tightly about its head. Hoptal had been a man once. It remembered the desires of flesh and blood, the hunger of snapping food and stuffing it alive into his stomach. The merchants had held the secret to their enslavement for centuries, a tightly guarded secret, and how fitting it was, as he had no longer a mouth to form words. The change had come upon him abruptly, as it had each of his twisted and misshapen brothers and sisters. He had been a man once. Now he craved only gold. He had seen the glittering piles, kept like midden heaps to draw flies, or foolish traders. The merchants were lusty in their quest for power. They held absolute control over him through a strict supply of gold to sate his unearthly desires. Without it, he would eventually fall apart, like so many grains of sand, to be forgotten on the winds. But the hunger raged inside him, forced him to submit to its call. One could not fight the instinct for survival. Many had tried. Their minds had broken, but still they served. Their minds feeble like a child's. He would take no more gold into his body for the space of a month. His body would begin tearing itself apart with the strength of his cravings near the end. But his masters were pitiless, and held grave consequences for failure. He would not return to the pit. The fear and stink still horrified his dreams. Another slave, one of his brethren, had been condemned to the pit for 2 months. He had heard the cries of pain and hunger that had emanated without end until the wretch's vocal cords had failed him at last. A shaking mass, sleeping in his own bile and excrement, they had pulled him up on steaming hooks that branded his flesh as it burned him. For the space of a moment, he removed the shroud that covered all of his face but the eyes. A tiny slit pulsated like a sore just beneath where his nose had once been. Unbroken skin covered the place where a mouth would be on a normal man. He remembered the golden coin. Greedily he had accepted it into his body, wasting not a moment to make the eternal haze of pain lift, if only for the space of days. The hunger would return, sure as the sun rose, sure as he would rise, for no earthly metal could rend his heart or stop his footsteps. No heart remained. Pain could be felt. The masters ensured that. Losing the fingers past the knuckle on his hands served only to humiliate him in front of the masters, a reminder of how he had failed in the past. But the loss did not hinder his effectiveness. He was the hammer that was sent forward, the blade that cut the rotting fruit from the tree, the howling mass that moved with unearthly speed at midnight. He craved beauty, the simple touch of a woman, but none would look on him now, hideous and deformed as he was. He felt their pain when he killed. He was forced to feel the minds of those he murdered, even as they left the mortal coil. Another cruel joke by the masters. He hated and feared them in equal measure. Rasham had been his brother once, but that had been so long ago now. How could Rasham have turned on his own brother? But he had. To gain influence and power, he had tricked Hoptal into becoming an abomination. Rasham was far crueler than many a taskmaster, his own spite and hatred of his older brother guiding his hand. Hoptal whimpered. The wind was hot and unforgiving. He had once had another name, but it too was blown away like dust. Eyes that would not move wept, and then the hunger returned, all-consuming, forcing his mind forward again, doggedly pulling him like a beast on a tether. He screamed, and the sound was horrible, echoing out over the bleak landscape. The hunger drove him on, as it always had. He would rise again tomorrow. There was no choice.